What is poppin' YouTube? Doing my wide receiver rankings for week 15 fantasy football. Congratulations if you made it into the playoffs. That's probably why you're watching this video. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. The first tier we got is the S tier. And starting off our S tier, it's not going to be Tyreek Hill like it's been the last few weeks. It's actually going to be CeeDee Lamb here in our S tier. But we do have CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Mike Evans, and Michael Pittman Jr. When we first start looking at this tier, of course, with CeeDee Lamb going up against Buffalo, it's an absolute fabulous matchup for CeeDee Lamb. It's going to be a high scoring game. And the thing is, CeeDee Lamb, as much as we've loved Tyreek Hill's upside, I just had CeeDee Lamb here as my wide receiver one this week going up against Buffalo. Probably going to finish somewhere between 20 to 25 fantasy points. I know he's projected on most sites around 19 fantasy points. Like this matchup, it is an absolute fabulous matchup. The Buffalo secondary has been struggling against elite level wide receivers, and that is exactly what CeeDee Lamb is. Then we move on to our next guy, Tyreek Hill versus the Jets. I know Tyreek Hill was kind of dealing with that injury in Monday night's game. For me, I still expect Tyreek Hill to play. He's going after that 2,000-yard season, so want to see what Tyreek Hill can do here versus the New York Jets. Of course, going against Sauce Gardner, but I don't even think it matters. I don't care what quarterback is defending against Tyreek Hill. I think it's almost impossible to stop Tyreek Hill at this point. Then we move on to the next guy in this tier, and it's going to be AJ Brown. Now, the Eagles put up an absolute terrible performance. Jalen Hurts didn't have a good day. DeAndre Swift didn't have a good day. AJ Brown really didn't have a good day this last week versus the Cowboys, but the Cowboys defense, that is to be expected. The Cowboys defense is maybe the best defense in all of football currently right now, but this week, AJ Brown's going up against Seattle. We saw what CeeDee Lamb was able to do to Seattle a few weeks ago. Absolutely love AJ Brown. And if there's a part of you that thinks AJ Brown and Tyreek Hill should be flipped here and this year, I wouldn't argue with you, but I do know it's kind of hard to put AJ Brown ahead of Tyreek Hill, especially after the body of work that Tyreek Hill's been putting up. Then move on to our wide receiver 4. We got Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Denver. He also had quite the down week. So if somehow you were able to get into the playoffs with Amon-Ra St. Brown having that little 5 to 6 point day in PPR, but going up against Denver, it's a good matchup. I think that the Detroit Lions are going to have to figure out this offense. They're going to have to get their wide receivers involved. So have Amon-Ra St. Brown here. Then Mike Evans also had a crappy day. So Amon-Ra St. Brown and Mike Evans both had really crappy days this last week. But Mike Evans is going up against Green Bay. He's been a clear wide receiver one for Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think he continues, gets right back on track. And rounding out the S tier, we got Michael Pittman. And Michael Pittman's been rising up our rankings each and every week. There's no reason not to have him as a top 6 wide receiver going up against Pittsburgh. Him and Gardner Minshew have absolutely been cooking. But I do have Michael Pittman here over Stephon Diggs, who leads off our A tier. Stephon Diggs versus Dallas. I just think this is going to be a really hard matchup. We saw what happened with AJ Brown this last week. And I know the Buffalo Bills are trying to get into the playoffs, so they need to win as many games as possible. So of course Stephon Diggs is going to be involved. It's just hard for me to put Stephon Diggs any higher knowing what we've seen this defense do to some top level wide receivers. So it's like an A matchup. I think he probably ends up somewhere around 13 to 15 fantasy points. I just don't think that elite level ceiling is there. Then we move on to Keenan Allen here as our wide receiver 8, and Keenan Allen without Justin Herbert will be interesting to see. I mean, I think going up against the Las Vegas Raiders, it's a pretty good matchup for Keenan Allen, but we'll see what happens with the backup quarterback throwing Keenan Allen the ball. You never like to see it, but Keenan Allen here still in my A tier. Then we move on to Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel's absolutely become the alpha wide receiver that we were projecting to be at the beginning of the season. This Brandon Ayuk breakout has been absolutely amazing, but Deebo Samuel's continuing to get more and more involved going up against Arizona. Just a great matchup for the 49ers all around. So I have Deebo Samuel here. We move on to DJ Moore, and DJ Moore has been a completely different wide receiver with Justin Fields than he was with Tyson Bagent, and I think that is to be expected. We saw that chemistry happening in the preseason to now, and so DJ Moore, if you drafted him and you were able to ride this little bit of a roller coaster that it's been for the Bears this season, you are ending up with a wide receiver 1. Next guy in this tier is going to be Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk, like we said, he's been the breakout player going up against Arizona. It's hard because him and Deebo really has overtaken him the last few weeks, but to no avail. I still think you should be confident starting Brandon Ayuk in your lineups, and then rounding out this A tier with my man Chris Olave. Chris Olave, it doesn't matter who's throwing the ball. It could be Jameis, it could be Derek Carr. Chris Olave is putting up fantasy points in bunches. Then we move on to our B tier. We got Jamar Chase, we got Cooper Kupp, we got DK Metcalf, we got Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, Devontae Smith. Starting off with Jamar Chase versus Minnesota this week. And yes, Jamar Chase had himself a good first week with Jake Browning. Last week, a lot to be desired on the field. So like I said, I had a lineup with Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I lost this last week, but I'm still in the playoffs, so that's good. But yeah, the upside on some of these wide receivers, it just was not there this last week. But I do like Jamar Chase this week going up against Minnesota. Cooper Kupp had himself quite the breakout day for Cooper Kupp. Those ankles still don't look great, but he is toughing through it, and Cooper Kupp clearly is the main target here for Matthew Stafford. As much as we still have Puka Nacua in this tier, I still like Cooper Kupp just a little bit more this week going up against Washington. Really great matchup. Then move on to DK Metcalf in this tier. DK Metcalf versus Philadelphia, and I'll just say this. First, it's not only DK Metcalf, AJ Brown going up, Old Miss brothers coming to battle it out, but DK Metcalf is on an absolute heater right now. I would just continue to ride the hot hand with DK Metcalf. Yes, this last week only 12 fantasy points, finished as a wide receiver 18, but I'm excited to see where DK Metcalf can end, and I think this is a really great matchup. The Seattle Seahawks are probably going to get down. I don't know if it's going to be Drew Lock or Geno Smith throwing the ball. I assume it's Geno this week since he took last week off, but like DK Metcalf here. Puka Nacua finished as a wide receiver 23 this last week, only 12 fantasy points, but honestly, still getting the targets. He's averaging around 8 to 10 targets a game, which is absolutely fabulous for a rookie wide receiver. No reason for us to be putting Puka Nacua any lower here in our rankings, especially going up against Washington. Going to be getting the cornerback 2 on the Washington Commanders. Like this matchup. Then Devontae Adams, Devontae Smith. Adams is going up against the Chargers. Like we said, with no Justin Herbert, this could be an interesting low-scoring game, but I'm still pretty confident in Devontae Adams, even up to this point this season. If we look at what happened last week, still 10 targets, 7 receptions, 53 yards. Finished as the wide receiver 33 because he didn't get a touchdown, but he still is getting the volume, so you still have to put him here. And then Devontae Smith rounding out this tier, the clear wide receiver 2. Last week, none of these Eagles wide receivers looked good against the Cowboys, so I still have him here in our B tier. Moving on to our C tier, we got Courtland Sutton, Jalen Waddle, Rashee Rice, DeAndre Hopkins, Garrett Wilson, and Jaden Reed. Starting off with Courtland Sutton versus Detroit. Really great matchup. Broncos are fighting for their wild card lives, so like Courtland Sutton here, they'll be throwing the ball against this Detroit Lions defense, which honestly, their secondary has been playing pretty well early in the season, but kind of has dropped off here as of recent. Then we move on to Jalen Waddle, and Jalen Waddle might be the most disappointing wide receiver in all of fantasy football. This last week finished as the wide receiver 25, 8 targets, 6 receptions, 79 yards, 11 fantasy points, which isn't bad, but the elite level 20-point upside, we really haven't seen that since week 8. And so for me to be telling you to start Jalen Waddle over some of these guys might be hard, but if you have Jalen Waddle, he's probably going to slide in, like we said, as a wide receiver 2 at this point in the season. Then we move on to Rashee Rice, and Rashee Rice is kind of on his breakout season, where this last week finished as a wide receiver 1, finished as the wide receiver 12 on the week, 10 targets, 7 receptions, 72 yards, and 1 total touchdown. We'll have to see if this continues, because Rashee Rice, for as much as we've seen these wide receivers really struggle for Patrick Mahomes, we do like Rashee Rice and the upside he presents versus New England. We assume the Kansas City Chiefs are going to go all out, have a nice scoring day like him there. DeAndre Hopkins is next up here. Him and Will Levis has quite the connection, and it's a going home party for DeAndre Hopkins going up against the Houston Texans. Will CJ Stroud be playing? I don't really think that affects my answer for the Tennessee Titans and their overall offense. Still like DeAndre Hopkins here and some Will Levis. Moving on to our next guy, it's going to be Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson for the Jets. Him and Zach Wilson seem to get it going this last week. They are going up against Miami, so they're going to have to throw the ball quite a lot. But finishing as the wide receiver 10 last week with 16 fantasy points, where of course he had 14 targets for 9 receptions, is absolutely insane. So 14 targets, if he can keep that up, that is the type of volume that we love to see for Garrett Wilson, even if it is an ill-efficient offense. Then Jaden Reed is next up in our rankings here versus Tampa Bay. Jaden Reed is the Green Bay Debo. Finished as a wide receiver 8. I was wrong on him last week, and you guys asked me a bunch of start-sit questions on Jaden Reed, and I need to apologize right here. I was wrong with some Jaden Reed. Then we move on to our D tier, and we got Zay Flowers, Justin Jefferson if he does play, Terry McLaurin, Calvin Ridley, Drake London, Tyler Lockett. Zay Flowers has had himself quite the year, stepping in as that clear wide receiver 1 option. Finished as the wide receiver 7 this last week with 17 fantasy points, 1 total touchdown, 10 targets, 6 receptions for 60 yards. Like some Zay Flowers leading off this year. Like we said, Justin Jefferson, if he does play, you're going to have to play him. But for those that bought low on Justin Jefferson, or that we were hoping that he was going to come back, there's a chance that he doesn't play the rest of the season. So really, honestly, I feel bad for us that have Justin Jefferson, but we're going to have to make do without him. Terry McLaurin is here next, getting the high volume Washington Commanders passing attack. This is the thing. In week 13, he did not have a great day, and then of course was on bye. So hopefully Terry McLaurin can be healthy going up against the Los Angeles Rams. I think they're going to get behind. They're going to have to throw the ball. So I do like some Terry McLaurin in this matchup. Calvin Ridley had himself quite the down day this last week versus Cleveland. Wide receiver 41. It's been a long season coming, where week 11 to week 12, just as wide receiver 1, wide receiver 8, and then all of a sudden the last few weeks, wide receiver 46, wide receiver 41. So for those that have Calvin Ridley, it's kind of just like we were saying, like a low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3. He's going to have those glimpses of old Calvin Ridley, but it's hard for me to bank on that, especially this week versus Baltimore and that really stingy pass secondary. Then we move on to Drake London. Drake London is going up against Carolina. Absolute fabulous matchup for Drake London. Finished as a wide receiver 2 last week, 11 targets, 10 receptions, 172 yards, 24 fantasy points. Drake London is who we always thought he would be, an alpha level wide receiver. We just always were saying, if you could get this guy a quarterback, when he has decent quarterback play, Drake London puts up fantasy football points. And then rounding out this year, we got Tyler Lockett versus Philadelphia. Tyler Lockett finished as the wide receiver 17 with 15 fantasy points. Shout out to Tyler Lockett, rounding out our D tier. Then moving on to our E tier, we got Brandon Cooks, Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, Jacoby Myers, Nico Collins. Nico Collins is pretty low just because we don't know where that injury is going to be. We also know where CJ Stroud is. We're recording this on Tuesday. We're putting that on Tuesday. Hard for me to tell you where that is. Deontay Johnson has been almost touchdown or bust for my guy, and it's hard because last week he had himself an okay day. I just can't rake him that much higher going up against Indy. They got a pretty good pass secondary. 15 fantasy points this last week, finished as wide receiver 18, 13 the week before. So he's putting up solid numbers. I just don't know where that upside's going to lean this week, especially when that upside doesn't look too good when he does not catch a touchdown. Mark Cooper with Joe Flacco. Shout out to the Cleveland Browns for having just an absolute crazy reemergence with Joe Flacco. It's been amazing. And then Adam Thielen with Bryce Young throwing the ball is not looking too hot. Then we move on to our F tier. We got Hollywood Brown, Chris Godwin, Josh Downs, T. Higgins, Odell Beckham, and Noah Brown. The thing I want to talk about with this tier specifically is with Josh Downs. I've been wrong on Josh Downs the last few weeks. A few of you asked me Jaden Reed versus Josh Downs last week, and I told you to go with Josh Downs. Clearly, I was wrong. I was a sucker, so I apologize for that. But we're getting it right this week with Josh Downs down here. T. Higgins, we like the volume that we saw with Jake Browning this last week. It's just hard because with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins, we don't know which of those wide receivers is going to be fantasy viable because it was already kind of fluctuating with Joe Burrow. But now with Jake Browning, it's kind of uncontrollable. Odell Beckham Jr. versus Baltimore. He had himself quite a nice day this last week, finishing as the wide receiver 9 with 20 fantasy points in PPR. I just don't know. Can he continue on that track? Because before this, wide receiver 69, wide receiver 20, wide receiver 32. It's been an up and down season for Odell Beckham. It's boom or bust. So that's why I have him here in this tier. And then, of course, Noah Brown as the wide receiver 2 for CJ Stroud. This ranking right here, he could potentially move up in my rankings if something were to happen where CJ Stroud's going to be playing this week and maybe Nico Collins is out. And or even if Nico Collins plays, I feel like he could definitely move up in the rankings. I just, at this current moment, with the uncertainty with CJ Stroud, have Noah Brown here. So I appreciate you guys for tuning into this video. Hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.